On a quiet winter afternoon in suburban Missouri, a 23-year-old woman walked out of her family's home, got into her car, and drove away just as she had many times before. Nothing about that moment seemed unusual. No raised voices, no sign of urgency. Just an ordinary departure on an ordinary day. Yet for her family, that simple act would become the last time they ever saw her. Hours later, the vehicle belonging to Phoenix Coldon was discovered abandoned along a street near St. Louis. The door was open. The keys were still in the ignition. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses who clearly saw what happened, and no camera footage capturing the moment she disappeared. It was as if she had stepped out of the world itself. More than a decade has passed, yet the question remains unchanged. What really happened on the afternoon of December 18, 2011? Was it an accident, a choice, or a secret no one had ever imagined? Spanish Lake lies on the northern edge of St. Louis, a suburban community where life tends to move at a quieter, steadier pace. Modest homes line calm residential streets, and daily routines rarely change. In the mornings, cars leave driveways for work. In the afternoons, children return from school. As evening arrives, porch lights glow softly, while neighbors settle into the familiar rhythm of ordinary life. In places like Spanish Lake, routine offers a sense of security. Residents recognize familiar faces at nearby stores and notice when something feels out of place. Although crime exists across the larger St. Louis region, many people in these neighborhoods believe serious danger happens somewhere else. There, streets feel predictable, stable, and removed from the kinds of mysteries that fill headlines. Winter in Missouri adds an extra layer of quiet. Trees stand bare after losing their leaves, their thin branches stretching against pale gray skies. The cold air carries a stillness that makes even small sounds travel farther. In December 2011, the neighborhood looked exactly as it always had. During the colder months, families prepared for the holidays while cars moved slowly along residential roads. But on the afternoon of December 18th, something unexpected began to unfold. A young woman walked out of her home, stepped into her car, and drove away from the street where she had grown up. At first, nothing about that moment appeared unusual. Yet within hours, concern would begin to spread through her family and eventually reach investigators. Her name was Phoenix Coldon. At 23 years old, Phoenix stood at a turning point between youth and independence. She was the only child of Goldia and Lawrence Coldon, parents who had built a disciplined household shaped by strong values, faith, and a desire to protect their daughter from the uncertainties of the outside world. From an outside perspective, the life of Phoenix Coldon appeared stable and secure. She lived near her family in the suburban area of St. Louis, had access to education, and seemed surrounded by the kind of support system many young adults wish they had. Nothing in her public life suggested immediate danger, emotional crisis, or the kind of instability that usually precedes a disappearance. Yet the psychology of early adulthood is rarely simple. For many people in their 20s, identity is not fixed, but constantly evolving. Personal ambitions begin to grow alongside. Family expectations and private decisions quietly develop beside the roles others believe they understand. The transition from dependence to independence can be subtle, sometimes unfolding in ways even close relatives fail to notice. In Phoenix's case, several acquaintances later suggested she might have been navigating exactly this kind of internal shift. Friends recalled moments when she appeared careful about what she shared with her parents. This behavior is not uncommon among young adults raised in protective households. When family rules feel strict, individuals often create small areas of privacy where they can explore friendships, interests, or relationships without worrying about judgment. Investigators later noticed hints that Phoenix may have been balancing two different versions of her life. One existed inside the family home, where she remained the responsible daughter who followed household expectations and maintained a predictable routine. Her parents believed they understood her activities and trusted she would share important details about her life. Outside that environment, however, another social world may have existed. Some acquaintances told investigators that Phoenix had formed friendships and connections her parents had never met. Psychologists sometimes call this identity compartmentalization, separating different parts of life to maintain harmony between competing expectations. Her father, Lawrence Coldon, had previously worked in law enforcement, an experience that often shapes how people view safety. For him, that background strengthened a deep instinct to protect his daughter. Family members later described Lawrence Coldon as attentive and watchful when it came to his daughter's daily life. Some observers interpreted this behavior as strictness, while others believed it reflected the instincts of a father shaped by years of experience in law enforcement. People who have witnessed crime up close often become more cautious, especially when it comes to protecting their families. Psychologists note that highly protective households can sometimes create complicated emotional dynamics. Young adults may appreciate the security their parents provide, yet at the same time feel pressure to prove their independence. As they grow older, this tension can lead them to separate parts of their lives, keeping certain friendships or activities private rather than confronting uncomfortable conversations at home. Friends who knew Phoenix Coldon outside her family circle later suggested she occasionally avoided discussing certain social activities with her parents. This behavior is not unusual among young adults seeking autonomy. Privacy can feel like a necessary step toward adulthood, especially when personal choices might conflict with family expectations. However, after Phoenix disappeared, these small details began to take on much greater significance. One of the most surprising discoveries involved communication. During the investigation, authorities learned that Phoenix had a second phone number that her parents did not know about. In modern life, multiple phones are not uncommon, but in a missing person case, a hidden number raises immediate questions. Phone records revealed contacts that did not appear on her primary device. Some belonged to individuals unfamiliar to her, family. Investigators also learned that Phoenix had visited social settings around St. Louis that had never been mentioned at home. These discoveries suggested that parts of her life existed beyond the boundaries her parents understood. For investigators, each unknown contact became a potential lead, and each unanswered question deepened the mystery surrounding the young woman who had vanished. On December 18, 2011, a cold winter Sunday settled quietly over the neighborhoods north of St. Louis. The gray sky and chilly air created the familiar stillness that often blankets Missouri in late December. In the suburban community of Spanish Lake, families spent the afternoon indoors while traffic moved slowly along calm residential streets. Nothing about that day suggested that a mystery was about to unfold. Earlier that morning, 23-year-old Phoenix Coldon had attended church with her mother. After the service, they stopped briefly at a grocery store before returning home to the family residence on Country Brook Drive. According to relatives, the day felt completely normal. At home, Phoenix changed into comfortable clothes, gray sweatpants, a dark hoodie, and sneakers, before stepping outside to shoot basketball in the driveway. Later that afternoon, Phoenix sat inside her mother's vehicle in the driveway, apparently speaking on the phone for several minutes. The vehicle was a black 1998 Chevrolet Blazer with tinted windows. Her parents did not find anything unusual about the scene. Around 2:23 p.m., her father saw the SUV pull out of the driveway and head down the street. They assumed she was making a short trip to a store or visiting a friend. From a psychological perspective, the final moments before a disappearance often appear completely ordinary. Investigators who later reconstruct timelines frequently find that the last confirmed actions of missing individuals contain no obvious warning signs. Phoenix's departure fit that pattern perfectly. She did not appear distressed, and there were no reports of conflict or urgency. To her family, it looked like a routine outing that would last only a short time. But as the afternoon continued, something strange happened. Phoenix did not return home. Hours passed, and the daylight began to fade across Spanish Lake. Porch lights flickered on as evening approached, and the neighborhood settled into its usual quiet rhythm. Inside the Coldon home, however, concern slowly began to grow. Phoenix was known to stay in contact with her parents and rarely stayed away without letting them know. Meanwhile, a crucial event occurred miles away. At approximately 5:27 p.m., Phoenix's black Chevy Blazer was discovered abandoned near the intersection of North 9th Street and St. Clair Avenue in East St. Louis. The location was about a 25-minute drive from her home, across the Mississippi River and into another state. The position of the vehicle immediately puzzled observers who later examined the case. Witnesses reported that the SUV was sitting partially in the roadway rather than parked neatly along the curb. According to reports, the engine had been running, and the driver's door was open when the vehicle was first noticed. Yet there were no signs of a crash, no broken glass, and no visible evidence of a struggle in the surrounding area. The scene appeared strangely empty, almost as if the driver had vanished in seconds. Because the car appeared to be simply abandoned, local authorities in East St. Louis followed standard procedure. Officers checked to ensure the vehicle had not been reported stolen and then arranged for a tow. At 6:23 p.m., the SUV was impounded and entered into a database as an abandoned vehicle. At that moment, no one realized that the car belonged to a woman who had just disappeared. The cross-state location complicated matters. Since the vehicle had been found in Illinois while Phoenix lived in Missouri, the information did not immediately connect with the missing person report filed later by her family. As a result, investigators in St. Louis County Police Department initially had no record showing that Phoenix's vehicle had already been located. When Phoenix failed to return home that night, her parents became increasingly alarmed. Repeated phone calls went unanswered. Messages received no response. This silence was deeply unusual. According to family members, Phoenix had always been responsible about checking in when she was away. By late evening, her parents began to fear that something might have gone terribly wrong. The next day, they contacted law enforcement and reported her missing. Investigators began the early stages of the search by reviewing phone records, interviewing friends, and examining Phoenix's recent activities. Officers attempted to determine where she might have been headed that afternoon and whether she had arranged to meet anyone. But the timeline between her departure and the discovery of the vehicle remained frustratingly unclear. One detail immediately troubled investigators. Phoenix's personal belongings, including her purse, glasses, identification, and other items, were later found inside the abandoned SUV. In most voluntary disappearances, individuals take essential belongings with them. Leaving behind these, items suggested that Phoenix likely did not intend to disappear permanently that afternoon. Another troubling detail soon emerged. After Phoenix Coldon disappeared, all activity on her bank accounts, phone records, and social media suddenly stopped. In a world where people constantly leave digital traces, that silence raised concern among investigators. It suggested that whatever happened likely occurred shortly after she left home. Despite interviews and searches, police found no reliable witnesses. Her abandoned SUV offered almost no forensic evidence, and DNA testing reportedly revealed no clear signs that anyone else had been inside the vehicle. And so the timeline of December 18, 2011 remains incomplete. A young woman drove away from her home in the middle of the afternoon. Within a few hours, her vehicle appeared abandoned across the state line. Somewhere within those missing hours, the trail of Phoenix Coldon simply vanished. More than a decade later, the central question remains unchanged. Who was Phoenix Coldon planning to meet on the day she disappeared? And what happened during the hours no one can explain? When a person disappears without warning, investigators usually begin with one essential goal: reconstruct the final hours of that individual's known movements. In the case of Phoenix Coldon, that process proved difficult almost immediately. The timeline contained large gaps, and the few confirmed facts raised troubling questions. Detectives in the greater St. Louis region quickly realized that understanding her final movements would be far more complicated than expected. The first step focused on digital evidence. Investigators reviewed Phoenix's phone records, hoping that recent calls or messages might reveal where she planned to go that afternoon. In modern investigations, communication data often provides a detailed map of a person's social connections and daily activities. Calls, texts, and location signals can reveal who someone interacted with and when those interactions occurred. However, the digital trail in Phoenix's case appeared incomplete. Detectives analyzed contacts linked to her primary phone number and traced the most recent calls placed before she left home on December 18, 2011. Several familiar names appeared in the records: friends, acquaintances, and people who had spoken with her during the previous days. Each of these individuals was contacted and interviewed by investigators from the St. Louis County Police Department. Detectives asked direct questions designed to identify any unusual behavior. When had they last spoken to Phoenix? Had she mentioned meeting someone that afternoon? Did she seem worried, distracted, or under emotional pressure? Most of the responses were ordinary. Friends described Phoenix as quiet, polite, and somewhat private about her personal life. None reported hearing about a specific plan for that Sunday afternoon. No one recalled a serious argument or conflict that might explain why she would suddenly disappear. In missing person investigations, detectives often search for what psychologists call behavioral deviation, a noticeable change in routine or mood that may signal stress or fear before a disappearance. Yet reports from Phoenix's friends and acquaintances revealed no clear warning signs. Investigators then shifted their attention to the location where her vehicle had been discovered. Earlier that evening, Phoenix's black Chevrolet Blazer had been found abandoned near the intersection of North 9th Street and St. Clair Avenue in East St. Louis, roughly 25 minutes from her home. Under normal circumstances, crime scenes sometimes provide physical clues, disturbed ground, discarded objects, or signs of a struggle. But by the time authorities began examining the location carefully, the situation had already changed. The vehicle had been towed as an abandoned car hours earlier, and traffic had continued passing through the area. Any fragile evidence that might once have existed was likely lost. The street looked ordinary again, offering no clear indication of what had taken place. As investigators worked to piece together events, the disappearance slowly reached the public. Local television stations and newspapers in the St. Louis region began reporting the case, displaying photographs of Phoenix and describing the unusual circumstances of her vanished vehicle. For Phoenix's parents, Goldia Coldon and Lawrence Coldon, the sudden media attention marked a painful new stage in the search. They appeared in interviews, describing their daughter and asking anyone with information to contact police. Families in these situations live with constant uncertainty. Every phone call might contain a clue. Every rumor could lead investigators closer to the truth or deepen the mystery. Public exposure sometimes produces valuable leads. Viewers may remember seeing something unusual, recognizing a vehicle, or recalling a conversation they once dismissed as unimportant. Detectives follow each tip carefully, hoping that a small observation might unlock a larger pattern. Yet in Phoenix's case, useful information remained scarce. Days turned into weeks, and weeks gradually became months. The disappearance that once drew attention across the St. Louis area slowly faded from daily news coverage. In investigative terms, the case began drifting toward the status detectives fear most: a cold case. A cold case does not mean the investigation stops entirely. Detectives continue reviewing evidence, analyzing records, and waiting for new information to emerge. But without fresh clues, progress often slows dramatically. During this time, investigators revisited people who had been closest to Phoenix before she vanished. Friends were interviewed again, and detectives examined contacts connected to a second phone number discovered during the investigation. Some of those contacts belonged to men who appeared only briefly in the communication records. Detectives attempted to determine whether these relationships involved friendship, romance, or simple acquaintance. Personal relationships often become central to missing person investigations. Emotional conflicts, jealousy, or misunderstandings sometimes escalate into dangerous situations. Because of this, investigators questioned several individuals repeatedly, yet none of the interviews produced a clear suspect. The men who had communicated with Phoenix denied meeting her that day or having any involvement in her disappearance. Investigators searched for inconsistencies in their statements but found no evidence strong enough to support criminal charges. Another possibility began circulating among people who knew Phoenix Coldon. Some acquaintances believed she may have been seeking greater independence from her family environment. From a psychological perspective, voluntary disappearance can occur when individuals feel pressure from expectations or personal conflicts. In some cases, adults leave intentionally, hoping to start new lives elsewhere without explaining their decision. Investigators considered this theory carefully. The lack of violence and limited physical evidence could suggest that Phoenix left on her own. However, several details made the idea difficult to support. There was no record of large withdrawals from her bank account, no packed belongings, and no indication she planned to relocate. Most importantly, she never contacted anyone again after leaving home that afternoon. For families, voluntary disappearance creates a painful paradox: hope that the person might still be alive, yet fear that they chose to leave forever. As the investigation into the disappearance of Phoenix Coldon continued, detectives began looking beyond the surface of her life. Early interviews had focused mainly on family members and close friends, but the lack of clear answers forced investigators to expand their search. Gradually, new details emerged, suggesting that parts of Phoenix's life may have been unknown to the people closest to her. In many missing person investigations, authorities eventually discover that a person's public identity reveals only part of their life. Different groups, family, friends, co-workers, often see different versions of the same individual. Psychologists note that these separate identities can exist without conflict, but when communication between those worlds is limited, misunderstandings and hidden pressures sometimes develop. As detectives gathered more information, they learned that Phoenix occasionally spent time in social environments unfamiliar to her parents. According to later interviews with acquaintances, she had visited nightlife venues in the greater St. Louis area. Some reports suggested she had also socialized in clubs or gatherings where her parents had never been present. For a young adult in her early 20s, this kind of exploration is not unusual. Many people at that stage of life experiment with new social circles, seeking independence and experiences outside the structure of home life. However, when someone grows up in a particularly strict household, those activities may remain private. Friends who knew Phoenix outside her family circle described her as curious about life beyond her immediate surroundings. They recalled that she enjoyed meeting new people and occasionally visiting different parts of the St. Louis area. These friendships and social connections appeared to exist largely outside the view of her parents. During the investigation, authorities also learned that Phoenix had been communicating with individuals her family had never met. Some contacts appeared through phone records and interviews with acquaintances. Each new name added another layer to the understanding of her daily life. Psychologists sometimes describe this situation as identity compartmentalization. Individuals separate different aspects of their lives to maintain harmony between competing expectations. What is shared with family may differ from what is shared with friends or romantic partners. In Phoenix's case, this separation may have been influenced by her home environment. Her father, Lawrence Coldon, had previously worked as a police officer, and family members described the household as structured and protective. According to relatives, her parents placed strong emphasis on discipline, safety, and close supervision. Some acquaintances later suggested that Phoenix occasionally felt restricted by these expectations. They recalled moments when she expressed interest in becoming more independent and making her own choices about relationships, work, and social life. Psychologists often describe early adulthood as a stage of identity formation. Young adults experiment with new roles, friendships, and ambitions as they gradually define who they are apart from their families. For many people, this process involves balancing independence with existing family relationships. However, the process can become complicated when secrecy replaces open communication. When individuals feel unable to discuss certain aspects of their lives openly, they may develop separate social worlds that rarely intersect. Investigators also encountered rumors suggesting that Phoenix had interacted with people whose lifestyles differed from the expectations of her family. Some acquaintances mentioned individuals from social circles that investigators had not previously encountered. Rumors are common in missing person investigations, especially when facts are limited. Detectives must evaluate such claims carefully, separating speculation from verifiable information. While some tips pointed toward unfamiliar contacts, none provided direct evidence explaining her disappearance. Still, the emerging picture suggested that Phoenix had been navigating a complicated personal transition. Inside her home, she remained the responsible daughter her parents recognized. Outside that environment, she appeared to be building a more independent, social life. Living between those two worlds can create emotional pressure. Psychologists note that maintaining separate identities sometimes produces feelings of isolation, especially if a person feels that neither environment fully understands them. As detectives continued their work, they considered an important question. Could Phoenix have been planning a major change in her life? Some investigators explored the possibility that she might have been thinking about moving away or starting over somewhere else. This theory occasionally appears in missing person cases involving young adults. Individuals sometimes leave home, voluntarily in search of independence or new opportunities. When this happens, the absence of violence or physical evidence can make the situation difficult to interpret. However, several details complicated that explanation. When investigators reviewed Phoenix's financial records, they found no sign that she had withdrawn large amounts of money. Her bank accounts showed no unusual activity in the days before she vanished. Detectives also examined her belongings at home. They found no packed luggage or signs that she had prepared for long-term travel. Friends did not recall her discussing plans to relocate or begin a new life in another city. Behavioral analysts note that voluntary disappearances usually involve preparation. People who intend to start over typically secure money, transportation, and important documents before leaving. In the case of Phoenix Coldon, investigators found no signs of such planning. Her bank accounts showed no unusual withdrawals. Her belongings remained at home, and there was no indication she had arranged a new place to live. This absence of preparation became a turning point in the investigation. If Phoenix had planned to leave permanently, she had done so without the resources most people need to survive independently. Because of this, detectives began considering another possibility, that she never intended to disappear at all. Many disappearances begin with ordinary plans. Someone leaves home expecting to return later, but something unexpected happens. A routine meeting turns tense, a conflict escalates, and a brief moment changes everything. Phoenix left home that afternoon, yet she never returned. More than a decade after the disappearance of Phoenix Coldon, investigators and the public are still left with the same troubling reality. No confirmed explanation exists for what happened on December 18, 2011. Despite years of work by the St. Louis County Police Department, the case remains unsolved. With limited evidence and large gaps in the timeline, investigators have examined several possible scenarios. In investigations like this, theories are not accusations. They are analytical frameworks used to explore what might have happened based on known facts, behavioral patterns, and comparisons with other criminal cases. Over time, 4 major theories have emerged regarding Phoenix's disappearance. Theory A: personal motive from someone. Close one of the most common explanations. In missing person investigations involves someone the victim already knew. Research shows that many crimes occur within existing relationships, friends, romantic partners, or acquaintances who have direct access to the victim's daily life. Under this theory, someone close to Phoenix may have had a personal motive linked to emotion or conflict. Romantic jealousy, arguments, or unresolved tension could have escalated unexpectedly. If Phoenix arranged to meet someone she trusted on the afternoon she disappeared, she may have felt comfortable leaving home. Without explaining her plans, familiarity could also explain why there were no visible signs of struggle near her vehicle. If she willingly approached someone she knew, the encounter might not have appeared suspicious to anyone nearby. However, despite numerous interviews and reviews of phone records, investigators have never identified direct evidence linking a specific person to her disappearance. Theory B. Accident turned into a cover-up. Another possibility is that Phoenix's disappearance began with an accident rather than a deliberate crime. In this scenario, an unexpected event occurred during a meeting or interaction with another person. Perhaps there was a minor vehicle collision, a heated argument, or a situation that resulted in unintended harm. Panic can lead individuals to make irrational decisions. Instead of contacting authorities, someone might attempt to hide what happened out of fear of legal consequences. This theory could potentially explain why Phoenix's vehicle was left behind on a road in East St. Louis. If an incident occurred nearby, abandoning the car might have been part of an attempt to distance themselves from the scene. However, investigators have reported no clear forensic evidence, such as collision damage or debris, that would confirm an accident occurred. Theory C. Stranger. Abduction. A third possibility involves an encounter with a stranger. Although random abductions are statistically rare, they do happen. In this scenario, Phoenix may have stopped her vehicle briefly during her drive. She might have paused because of directions, a minor mechanical issue, or a momentary stop along the road. During that time, an opportunistic offender could have approached. Predatory criminals sometimes target situations where someone is alone and vulnerable. If such an encounter occurred, the event may have unfolded quickly and without witnesses. However, the location where her vehicle was discovered was not completely isolated. Roads in the area still carried traffic and nearby homes existed. No confirmed reports of suspicious individuals or vehicles have ever been publicly connected to the case. Theory D. Someone unexpected from her circle. The fourth theory lies between the previous two. Instead of a close friend or a total stranger, the person involved could have been someone Phoenix knew only casually. This might include a social acquaintance, someone she met through nightlife environments in the St. Louis area, or an individual who had interacted with her occasionally. These types of relationships often exist on the edges of a person's social network and may not appear significant during early investigations. Such a person might still have known enough about Phoenix's routines to arrange a meeting or recognize her vehicle. If they encountered her unexpectedly, she may not have considered the interaction dangerous. Yet, as with the other theories, investigators have not identified a specific individual who clearly fits this scenario. Each theory surrounding the disappearance of Phoenix Coldon attempts to explain the same troubling questions. Why was her vehicle abandoned on a street near East St. Louis? Why did no confirmed witness report seeing what happened that afternoon? And why has no verified trace of her appeared in the years since that winter day in 2011? The personal motive. Theory suggests that someone within Phoenix's social circle may have been involved, possibly driven by emotional conflict or a private dispute. The accident theory proposes that an unexpected incident occurred and was later hidden out of panic or fear. The stranger abduction theory considers the possibility that Phoenix encountered a random offender during a brief stop along her route. Finally, the acquaintance theory focuses on someone only loosely connected to her life, an individual she knew casually but who may have had the opportunity to approach her without raising suspicion. Each theory offers elements that could match the known facts of the disappearance of Phoenix Coldon. Yet every explanation faces the same obstacle: the absence of clear, verifiable evidence. No witness has confirmed what happened after she left home, and no forensic discovery has definitively pointed investigators in a single direction. This uncertainty illustrates one of the greatest challenges in unresolved investigations. Detectives must examine multiple possibilities, compare behavioral patterns, and follow even the smallest leads, while recognizing that the truth may still exist outside the evidence currently available. For the family of Phoenix Coldon, the mystery remains deeply painful. Years have passed without answers, leaving them with the same haunting questions. Who was the last person to see her alive? What happened during the missing hours between the moment she drove away from her home and the discovery of her abandoned vehicle near East St. Louis? When investigators confront a case with so few physical clues, they often turn toward something less tangible but equally important: human psychology. Understanding the emotional and behavioral patterns surrounding a disappearance can sometimes reveal possibilities that evidence alone cannot. In the case of Phoenix Coldon, many analysts have observed that her life appeared to be standing at a crossroads. Psychologists frequently note that major life transitions can become periods of vulnerability. Young adults entering their 20s often face competing pressures, expectations from family, personal ambitions, financial realities, and the desire to shape their own identity. These pressures do not always appear dramatic on the surface. To outsiders, a person may seem calm and stable, but internally, they may be navigating complex emotional questions about who they are and where their life should go next. Phoenix's situation reflected several of these dynamics. On one side of her life stood a structured household environment. Her parents were known to maintain strong discipline and clear expectations. Stability, faith, and responsibility formed the foundation of the family culture. For many families, these values provide security and guidance. But for some young adults, strict structure can also create a feeling of confinement. The desire for independence becomes stronger as adulthood approaches, especially when a person begins building social relationships outside the home. Phoenix appeared to exist between these two worlds. One world was defined by family order, routine, and protection. The other was defined by exploration, meeting new people, experiencing different environments, and imagining possibilities beyond the life she had always known. Psychologically, living between two identities can create internal tension. A person may feel loyalty toward family while simultaneously feeling drawn toward personal freedom. Each decision becomes emotionally complicated. Expressing independence might feel like betrayal. Following expectations might feel like losing oneself. Many people navigate this tension gradually, negotiating boundaries over time. But in some cases, the pressure builds quietly beneath the surface. Some experts who have reviewed the broader context of Phoenix's life suggest that she may have been experiencing exactly this type of transition. The discovery of new social connections, different environments, and hidden aspects of her routine suggests that she may have been experimenting with a life that her family did not fully understand. This does not mean she was in danger, but it does indicate that her emotional landscape may have been more complicated than it first appeared. When a disappearance occurs during such a transitional phase, investigators must consider a wide range of psychological possibilities. Did the person choose to leave temporarily in search of independence? Did they encounter someone who influenced their decisions? Or did they simply find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time during a moment of exploration? These questions remain central to understanding Phoenix's story. Beyond psychology, the mystery of her disappearance also invites deeper philosophical reflection. Across different cultures, philosophers have long questioned how well humans truly know one another, even within families. In Western philosophy, thinkers often explore the limits of personal knowledge. We assume we understand the people closest to us, yet every individual carries private thoughts, fears, and ambitions that remain invisible to others. Even parents may not fully know the inner world of their adult children. The disappearance of someone like Phoenix forces that uncomfortable realization into the open. The life her parents saw may have been only one part of a much larger story. Eastern philosophical traditions offer another perspective. In Buddhist thought, life is often described as a cycle shaped by attachment, expectation, and suffering. Human beings create identities based on roles: daughter, student, worker, friend. But these identities can also become sources of pressure. When individuals feel trapped by expectations, they sometimes search for ways to escape those invisible boundaries. That search does not necessarily mean abandoning loved ones. Often, it simply reflects a deep human desire to understand one's own path. In Phoenix's case, the tension between structure and freedom may have formed part of her personal journey. Whether that tension played a role in her disappearance remains unknown. What makes the mystery even more haunting is the absence of definitive answers. Despite years of investigation, no confirmed explanation has emerged. Yet some experts believe the future may still hold possibilities for new discoveries. Advances in technology have transformed criminal investigations in recent years. Digital. Forensic tools have become far more sophisticated than those available in 2011. Phone data, archived communications, and previously overlooked records can sometimes be reanalyzed with modern techniques. Even small fragments of digital information, old call logs, forgotten contacts, location metadata, can reveal connections that investigators could not see before. Cold cases around the world have been solved decades later because of new analytical methods. Some investigators believe the same could eventually happen in Phoenix's case. Re-examining old data, identifying overlooked witnesses, or discovering new technological insights could open paths that were once invisible. For families of missing persons, this possibility represents a fragile form of hope. Hope that time itself may eventually bring clarity. Hope that somewhere someone remembers a detail they once dismissed as unimportant. Hope that silence will one day give way to truth. And yet, until that moment arrives, the psychological questions remain. If Phoenix Coldon is still alive somewhere, living under a new identity or in a distant place, one haunting question remains. Why has she never contacted the people who loved her? And if she is no longer alive? Then another question becomes even more chilling. Who was responsible for making a 23-year-old woman disappear so completely that more than a decade later, the world still has no clear answer? More than a decade has passed since Phoenix Coldon walked out of her home in suburban St. Louis and disappeared into an ordinary winter afternoon. No confirmed answers have ever emerged. Only an abandoned vehicle, unanswered questions, and a family still waiting for the truth. Cases like this remind us that a person's life may hold hidden layers no one fully sees until it is too late. Some mysteries do not end with noise or violence. Instead, they end in silence, an empty space, where explanations should be. If you have your own theory about what might have happened, share it in the comments. And if you want to hear more real cases like this, remember to like, share the video, and subscribe to support the channel, because sometimes the truth hides in the smallest details. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.